In today's episode, we look at 3 people whose worst decisions didn't just get them in trouble, they got them eaten alive. From a drunken dare in the Florida Everglades to a fatal leap off a cruise ship. But first, a drunken dare in the Florida Everglades, a case of beer, and one man's final swim with a 12-foot alligator. April 13, 2019 was the final full night aboard the Carnival Elation, a 2,000-passenger cruise ship. The vessel had just departed Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, and was making its way north through the deep, narrow trench known as the Tongue of the Ocean, a stretch of warm, open sea west of New Providence Island. Overhead, the sky was moonless and still. Below, the water was dark, calm, and hundreds of feet deep. It was the kind of night that felt peaceful from above, but just beneath the surface, something was moving. Around 1:30 a.m., the late-night crowd had thinned to scattered groups of younger passengers finishing off cheap drinks. Near the starboard railing, a few guests lingered, laughing and swaying in the dark. Among them were 2 women, 29-year-old Anastasia Morova, a Russian tourist visiting the U.S. on a travel visa, and her longtime friend Elena Korin, a Russian expat living in Miami. The cruise had been a spontaneous decision. Anastasia was between jobs and had left Moscow just 2 months earlier after the end of a long-term relationship and a string of personal and professional letdowns that had left her feeling adrift. For most of her 20s, she had built a life that looked steady on the outside, marketing career, high-rise apartment, a fiancé with good prospects. But by the start of that year, all of it had come undone. She was the one who left it behind, but not with a plan. Just a passport, a suitcase, and a need to feel untethered. Florida was meant to be a reset. The cruise, just a brief escape. Anastasia moved through the trip the way she moved through most things. Charming, impulsive, and hard to pin down. She spent the final night bouncing between bars, swimming in the saltwater pool, talking to strangers, and drinking rum cocktails 2 at a time. She laughed too loudly, danced barefoot on the deck, and didn't bother with formal photos. There was no sign of sadness, no open distress, just the kind of restlessness that made it easy to mistake recklessness for confidence. She wasn't self-destructing, she was just burning off the weight of everything she'd left behind. What neither she nor anyone else seemed to realize was how close they were to the edge. The waters off the western coast of New Providence Island just beyond Nassau are part of a steep drop zone where the continental shelf plunges abruptly into deep ocean. Known as the Tongue of the Ocean, this long, trench-like channel runs parallel to the island chain and forms a natural corridor for marine life, particularly large predators. Below the surface, sharp reef shelves give way to deep open water where the currents shift suddenly and visibility fades fast. It's one of the most biologically active areas in the region, and a known hotspot for fast-moving sharks. Among them, Caribbean reef sharks, oceanic whitetips, and one of the most aggressive species in the world, bull sharks. Bull sharks are different from other large sharks in both physiology and behavior. Stockier than tiger or great white sharks, they can exceed 10 feet in length and weigh over 500 pounds. They're highly territorial, capable of surviving in saltwater, brackish, and even freshwater systems, and are responsible for more confirmed human attacks than any other shark species. But it's not just their bite force or speed that make them dangerous, it's their proximity. Bull sharks often patrol areas much closer to human activity than most people realize. They're attracted to movements at the surface, to shadow lines and turbulence, and especially to cruise ships, which churn up sediment and discharge food waste, creating what some researchers describe as a vertical buffet just beneath the hull. Over the years, there have been multiple sightings of bull sharks trailing cruise lines through Bahamian waters, particularly at night. Ship lighting, vibration, and discharge create an artificial hotspot in otherwise quiet seas. Dive operators near Nassau had reported higher than normal shark activity in the week leading up to the Carnival Elation's departure. In one case, a group of bulls were spotted circling a docked charter boat just before dark, unusual behavior for a species that typically prefers to strike and retreat. No public warnings were issued. The ship sailed on schedule. Between the trench below and the turbulence above, the water surrounding the Carnival Elation that night were primed for exactly the kind of predator that doesn't wait for an invitation. The ship was moving steadily through the tongue of the ocean, a deep, narrow trench where warm surface waters meet colder, nutrient-rich currents rising from the seafloor. Marine life concentrates along that boundary. Schools of baitfish, squid, and scavengers trail behind ships, followed closely by sharks. Beneath the surface, vibrations from the engines, light leaking through the hull, and the slow drift of food waste create a moving target zone, a vertical column of noise and scent stretching for miles. By the time Elation cleared New Providence and pushed into open water, the sea around it was already awake. Something was moving below the hull, slow at first, circling, then angling closer as the ship churned forward. Above, no one gave it a thought. The deck party had thinned, but the music still played, a low electronic thump vibrating through the railings. The pool deck smelled like rum, sunscreen, and chlorine. A few strangers smoked by the lifeboats. Somewhere near the bow, someone was vomiting quietly into a napkin. It was late, but not quiet. Just late enough for people to stop paying attention. Near the starboard rail, Anastasia and Elena were laughing too loudly. They were barefoot, tipsy, flushed with heat and alcohol. Their hair was damp from the pool, their skin glowing with sweat and salt. One of them made a joke, something about jumping, about proving a point. People nearby chuckled, a few told them not to. No one moved. No one expected them to do it. Then they did. In a single sudden movement, they climbed the railing, bare feet on slick steel, and leapt into the black water below. Two splashes echoed up to the deck, one deep and loud, the other thinner, sharper. Elena surfaced first, gasping and shrieking as the cold water closed around her. Disoriented and flailing, she kicked toward the ship, struggling to stay afloat. Her cries cut through the noise on deck, sharp and panicked, snapping the nearby crew into motion. Within moments, alarms sounded and floodlights blazed across the surface of the sea. A life ring was thrown, landing several feet away, and rescue staff leaned over the railing, scanning for movement. Elena fought her way toward the ring and was pulled aboard within minutes, trembling, drenched, and hysterical. But Anastasia never came up. For a few seconds, the water remained calm, then a splash farther out. Someone on deck pointed toward the beam of light. Something large, dark, and low to the surface was moving just beyond the ring's reach. One passenger claimed they saw a fin cut across the spotlight, smooth, angular, and deliberate before vanishing again beneath the water. Another described a second splash that came from a different angle, followed by a sudden violent disturbance, like something was thrashing just under the surface, churning the water for several seconds before going still. There was no scream, no sign of struggle, no floating debris, just the brief image of movement in the dark and then nothing. The water settled, the light kept sweeping, but Anastasia was gone. The ship came to a full stop. The U.S. Coast Guard was notified immediately and a full-scale search began at first light. Over the next 48 hours, helicopters, cutters, and a patrol craft combed more than 1,300 square nautical miles of ocean. No clothing, no flotation debris, no remains. Nothing. Maritime experts reviewing the case later concluded that a fatal shark attack was the most probable outcome. The area was active, conditions were primed. The jump had been unexpected, sudden, and loud, exactly the kind of surface disturbance that would trigger predatory interest. If Anastasia had been struck by a bull shark or a white tip in hunting mode, the attack would have been quick and catastrophic. One strike could have severed a limb or compromised her ability to stay afloat. A second would have dragged her under. The fact that nothing surfaced afterward aligned with patterns seen in prior open water attacks involving these species. Elena decided to speak to reporters and was quietly escorted off the ship at the next port. Crew said she spent the night in the infirmary, distraught and unresponsive, and flew home within days. Carnival released a brief statement confirming a passenger overboard and reminding guests to follow safety protocols. No charges were filed, no memorial was held. Anastasia's family was notified through the Russian consulate. With no body recovered, the case remained open for months before being reclassified as a presumed drowning. What started as a reckless party ended in silence beneath the waves. But thousands of miles away in the stillness of Yellowstone National Park, a different kind of misstep played out. There were no floodlights, no search crews, just a group of friends, a campfire, and one bad decision that brought a grizzly out of the trees. June 24, 2017 was the first night of a long overdue weekend getaway for a group of friends meeting up in Yellowstone National Park. The weather had been ideal, dry, breezy, and just cool enough to make the pine-scented air feel crisp after sunset. The campground at Slough Creek was nearly full but quiet. Campfires crackled behind tree lines, low voices drifted across the still dark. At the far end of the loop, a rented pickup and 2 tents marked the edge of one particular site, just a few hundred feet from the river and surrounded on all sides by thick stands of lodgepole pine. It was the kind of place that felt far from everything, tucked just deep enough into the wild to forget how quickly things can change. Inside the campsite, 5 men in their early 30s were halfway through a cooler of beer, gathered around a portable fire pit and a Bluetooth speaker. They'd been friends since college, roommates once, now scattered across 3 states and reunited for one long weekend off the grid. It was the kind of trip they used to take every summer, back when no one had kids or desk jobs or reasons to check their phones. This time it was Mike Donovan's idea. Mike was 32, an accountant from Boise, and newly single after a difficult breakup that had left him quieter than usual, though he rarely let it show. He was the kind of guy who held things close, dependable, easy to be around, but hard to read. In college, he'd been the one everyone counted on to keep plans organized, to spot you a beer, to remember the tent poles. In the years since, the group had drifted, but Mike had stayed in touch with all of them. Birthdays, weddings, the occasional late-night group chat. This trip had been his idea. He hadn't gone camping in over 6 years, but he'd packed for it like it was a reset. New gear, new clothes, a folding knife still in its packaging. He wasn't an outdoorsman, but he wanted to be, at least for the weekend. When the ranger at check-in warned them about proper food storage, Mike was the first to nod. He'd read the pamphlet, he'd bought the bear-proof canister. But by the time the beers were open and the fire was going, the snacks stayed in the tents. They'd hung the cooler but ignored everything else. Nothing had happened last time, so it didn't seem like a big deal. What the group didn't fully grasp, what most casual visitors never do, is that Yellowstone has one of the most active grizzly bear populations in the lower 48. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem is home to roughly 700 grizzlies. And unlike black bears, grizzlies are larger, more territorial, and far more likely to react with aggression if surprised or provoked. Adult males can weigh over 600 pounds and sprint at speeds of 30 miles per hour. Their sense of smell is 7 times stronger than a bloodhound's, and they can detect food from miles away. During summer, when natural foraging is unpredictable and calorie demands are high, bears are often drawn to campsites by the faintest trace of garbage, snacks, or scented items. They don't always announce themselves. By 11:45 p.m., the music had faded to background static, and most of the group was winding down. The fire had burned low, casting a soft orange glow across the clearing. Someone made a joke about their gourmet bear bait still sitting in the tents, and they all laughed, not thinking much of it. The night was calm, almost too calm. A few times earlier, they'd heard faint rustling beyond the tree line, but chalked it up to wind or small animals. Once, Mike thought he saw movement just outside the flashlight's reach, a dark shape slipping between tree trunks, but when they shined the light, there was nothing there. He shrugged it off, maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him. The air had cooled and the woods around them felt darker now, thicker, heavier somehow. The breeze that had stirred the treetops earlier had stopped. The bugs had quieted too. At ground level, everything was still, too still. Then came a sharp snap, a stick breaking clean. someone stood to put the fire out. Another crunch, closer this time and unmistakably heavy. A long breath of silence followed, broken only by the soft clink of a beer can in someone's hand. A flashlight flicked on and swung toward the trees. Just beyond the circle of firelight, two round amber eyes caught the beam. The bear had already crossed into the sight. Someone shouted, another scrambled for the truck. Chaos erupted instantly. Chairs toppled, a can spilled, and 4 of the 5 men bolted toward the vehicle. The bear didn't charge, not yet. It kept advancing slowly, nose low, following the scent trail toward the tent flap where an open bag of beef jerky was still sitting by someone's sleeping bag. Mike had been the last to react. He was halfway to his feet when he stumbled, tripping over the cooler straps while still holding a half-empty can of beer. At first, he laughed. He thought they were overreacting. But when he looked up, the bear was already on the other side of the fire pit. It moved fast. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds. Mike tried to crawl backward, but only made it a few feet before the bear lunged. The first blow came from a massive paw, raking across his chest and knocking him flat. His friend screamed from inside the truck, pounding on the windows and yelling to distract it. But the bear didn't flinch. It clamped down on Mike's shoulder and dragged him off the trail into the tree line, his legs leaving twin grooves in the dirt. His screams cut off as the darkness swallowed them both. No one followed, no one dared. The group called 911 from the truck and waited frozen in place until Rangers arrived. It took them nearly an hour to reach the site. By then, the bear was gone, and so was Mike. What remained at the scene left little doubt about what had happened. The ground was torn, the underbrush flattened, and blood was smeared across the rocks leading into the woods. His shredded jacket was found 10 yards from the tree line. The following morning, search teams recovered partial remains near the edge of the tree line. Tissue, bone fragments, and a torn section of fabric matching the shirt Mike had been wearing. That afternoon, Rangers set a trap nearby, and within 48 hours, a large adult male grizzly was captured in the same area. DNA analysis later confirmed that the bear had been involved in the attack. It was euthanized under park protocol. The campsite was closed immediately. Visitors were turned away for the next 3 weeks while additional patrols swept the area for food attractants and dens. Rangers confirmed that multiple violations had occurred, including unsecured trash and improper storage of scented items, but no charges were filed. The surviving members of the group cooperated fully with investigators and returned home shortly after the remains were recovered. Mike's death was officially classified as a fatal bear attack resulting from food-conditioned behavior. His family held a small memorial service in Boise the following week. There was no media circus, just a brief article in a local paper and a reminder from park officials that warnings are not suggestions. They are survival tools. For Mike Donovan, a weekend of memories turned into something else entirely. And for everyone else at the campsite, the sound of breaking branches in the dark would never mean the same thing again. The forest offered no second chances, but neither did the swamp. While Yellowstone had its own rules, the backwaters of Florida were even less forgiving. There, a drunken dare in alligator country turned a shortcut into a fatal mistake, and the predator waiting beneath the surface didn't hesitate. August 9, 2013 was a stifling summer night deep in the western Everglades, where the airboat channels twist between mangroves and sawgrass like a maze no one bothered to map. The sky had gone dark an hour earlier, but the heat hadn't lifted. Humidity clung to every surface. Frogs called from the mudbanks in sharp bursts, and insects buzzed so loudly it drowned out conversation. The water looked still, but it wasn't. It was breathing, shifting, alive. This part of the Everglades, just outside Chokoloskee, was known to local fishing guides as a gator cut, a shallow section of winding backwater barely 30 feet across. It wasn't on any formal tour route, but experienced locals used it for nighttime bow fishing or gar spotting trips. The margins were dense with lily pads and cypress roots, and by August, the alligator activity was impossible to ignore. Everything here fed on something else. Jason Mercer had no reason to know any of that. The 34-year-old was on vacation from Ohio, where he worked as a service tech at a regional HVAC company. He'd flown into Miami 2 days earlier with 2 co-workers to escape a summer heat wave back home, which, ironically, had pushed temperatures nearly as high as those in southern Florida. The trip had started as a joke, something about Airboat Beer Week, but by the time they were halfway through the cooler, they'd committed to making it memorable. Jason wasn't reckless by reputation, but he was bold when he drank. He was the one who booked the airboat rental, the one who talked the guides into a night run, and the one who kept filming clips on his phone with titles like Florida Man Summer. He was loud, quick to challenge his friends to stupid dares, and, according to everyone on board, convinced nothing bad ever really happened on vacation. They launched just before sunset with 2 part-time fishing guides, Carlos Diaz and Trevor Wilson, who agreed to help navigate but warned them repeatedly about where they were headed. The stretch they were entering had a known population of large adult male alligators. It wasn't illegal to fish there after dark, but most people didn't. Jason ignored the warnings. So did his friends. By 9 p.m., the boat was drifting near a narrow bend in the channel, lit by a single floodlight rigged to the bow. The guides had stopped casting lines and were beginning to pack up when Jason, laughing and shirtless, suggested a shortcut. He'd swim across the waterway instead of letting the boat circle back. It wasn't far, maybe 20 feet, with still water and no visible current. His friends howled, egging him on and pulling out phones. The guides told him flatly not to, but Jason was already standing at the edge. He handed down his beer, counted down from 3, and dove in. Alligators are ambush predators, evolved for stealth and explosive power. Their physiology is engineered for still water and sudden violence. With vertically placed eyes, a low-set body, and powerful tails that can launch them forward in an instant, they can remain almost completely invisible beneath the surface until the moment they strike. At night, their hunting instincts sharpen. They rely on a network of pressure-sensitive pits along their snouts, known as integumentary sensory organs, to detect the faintest vibrations from movement above or below the surface, even in total darkness. Summer, especially late summer, marks peak aggression in adult males. As water levels drop and food sources shift, competition intensifies, and alligators become more territorial and opportunistic. They are drawn to disturbances in the water, splashing, surface motion, unnatural noise, all of which mimic the behavior of struggling prey. 12-foot specimens weighing over 500 pounds are not uncommon in isolated backwater regions like this, and many are never tagged or documented. They don't bluff. When they strike, it's without warning, rapid, deliberate, and often fatal. Jason swam strong at first, his strokes uneven but determined, splashing hard and laughing between breaths. The water was warmer than he expected, thick, heavy with algae, and each movement stirred pockets of silt from the channel floor. His friends egged him on from the airboat, shouting, laughing, calling out encouragement between drinks. He was nearly halfway across when the lily pads near the far bank began to shift. At first, it looked like nothing, just a ripple. Then another. A bulge of water lifted near the edge of the pad, slow and deliberate, as something massive rose from below. The alligator struck broadside. There was no warning, no roar, no splash. Just sudden motion, fast and silent. At over 12 feet long, the animal surged from beneath the lily pads and clamped its jaws around Jason's midsection with crushing force, dragging him under in a single brutal lunge. His scream tore through the air like a gunshot, sharp and panicked. Their laughter on the boat stopped instantly. One friend dropped his drink, another began shouting incoherently and hurling beer cans toward the disturbance. But the creature didn't hesitate, it rolled fast and hard, twisting Jason's body with terrifying power. His limbs flailed, briefly visible above the surface, then vanished again as the water churned dark with blood and silt. He surfaced once, arms thrashing, mouth open in a gasping cry, reaching desperately toward the boat. For a split second, he was almost close enough to believe he might make it. Then the gator jerked sideways and pulled him under again. The water exploded into foam and spray, then settled into a steady boil of movement, rolling, tearing, consuming. The thrashing slowed, then stopped. Carlos and Trevor tried to follow. They turned the boat sharply and steered toward the disturbance, sweeping the channel with the floodlight as they shouted Jason's name into the dark. The engine sputtered as they idled over the spot where the attack had occurred, the beam of light cutting through churned water and broken lily pads. Ripples spread outward, then faded. The surface settled. Aside from a faint slick of bubbles and a single torn pad slowly drifting downstream, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the steady hum of insects and the low drone of the motor. Carlos radioed for help immediately, his voice tight and panicked. Trevor dropped anchor and stood at the edge of the deck, scanning the water in silence. The remaining passengers were frozen, shocked, drunk, and pale in the floodlight's glow. When Rangers arrived just after 10 p.m., the airboat was still in the same place. Lights trained on an empty patch of water, no one speaking. The official search began at sunrise. Airboats were deployed at first light, accompanied by a canine unit offshore and a dive team trained for gator country recovery. The stretch of water was cordoned off, and rangers used long poles to probe the channel floor, working slowly through debris and soft silt. Spotters watched for movement along the banks, while other crews checked for drag marks or fresh trails through the reeds. By late morning, they found partial remains caught on a submerged root shelf downstream. Strips of torn clothing, soft tissue, and a section of bone. Nearby, wildlife officers spotted a 12-foot alligator circling near the bank, behaving defensively toward approaching boats. It was captured that afternoon and euthanized. Inside were human remains consistent with Jason's injuries, including a fragment of his swim trunks. The investigation that followed was quiet but conclusive. Witness statements from the guides and surviving friends aligned with the physical evidence recovered at the scene. Toxicology reports later revealed that Jason's blood alcohol content was more than 3 times the legal driving limit. No charges were filed. The death was ruled accidental. Park officials issued a statement urging visitors to avoid nighttime boating in wildlife-heavy zones and never enter the water under any circumstances. The area where the attack occurred was closed for 6 weeks, then reopened with additional signage. Jason's body was cremated, his remains were sent back to Ohio. His family declined to speak to reporters. In the end, Jason Mercer didn't die in a freak accident or some unpredictable twist of fate. He swam into an ambush in still water at night, drunk, unaware, and surrounded by predators perfectly designed for moments like that. One strike, one twist, then silence. Thanks for watching this video. If you loved this video, you'll for sure also love the one on your end screen right now. Hope to see you there.